All right, today we'll be talking about Descartes' Discourse on Method, Part 1. I've given you some video content to look at prior to class, so I'm assuming that everybody's read these 6 pages and zeroed in on some of the points I have identified videos to pay attention to. So I'd like to take some time today in lecture and discussion to walk through the main points that we're seeing in this work that Descartes has written, and to apply them to where we are right now in our class. We just finished with Bacon and Galileo. We're taking a look at the difference that this new scientific attitude is making in our philosophy. So the 3 topics I've picked out on the board here, we'll talk about Descartes' modesty at the beginning of the discourse. We'll see something similar when we read the Meditations next week. Descartes goes to a great elaborate show of talking about the limits of his intellectual powers and about how his rule that he's giving here, he'll give us rules for his method in part 2, are only for himself. And he's just sharing this with people in the hopes that perhaps people might find themselves in a similar situation and be able to profit from some of his introspection and thought. But he's not by any means presenting himself as an authority from whom people should learn or after whom they should model their behavior. So we'll take a look at his professions of modesty and talk about what function they serve and to what extent we should take them seriously. Second point, the emphasis on method. This is the discourse on method, or specifically the discourse on the method for conducting one's reason well and for seeking truth in the sciences. We'll talk about Descartes' method, his idea that there is a single method that is best for the human mind for acquiring knowledge in the sciences, and that this is the method that we should follow. The third point, the assumptions that Descartes makes. This is one of the things I asked you, especially looking at his evaluation of his prior education at the University of Paris. He goes through each subject and offers a kind of witty, sometimes zinger-type commentary on the value of it. We find him praising mathematics. We find him being fairly dismissive towards philosophy and languages and some other fields of study. And we get an idea of what he is planning to do with his own education. He's telling us the story of how he became the man he is today. And he's presenting as a kind of story or fable, he says, an account of his own intellectual development. So let's tackle those topics in order if we can. Starting with his modesty. Do we take Descartes seriously? Should we take him seriously when he talks about the limits of his own mind? Thoughts? Okay, I'll be specific. On page 2, the second paragraph, he says, "For myself, I have never presumed that my mind was in any respect more perfect than that of ordinary men." What's he doing here?
He doesn't say he's not like everyone else, but he's kind of like everyone else.
Yeah, he says, I don't think I'm better than everyone else, right? So it begins by saying, this is not a work that's coming from a position of superiority or a presumption of superiority. What else should we take from this? Well, I'm not smarter than you. What's the effectiveness? Why would someone say that at the beginning of a discourse on the method for conducting your reason well? Rebecca, and then
We'll have to call it if you don't want.
okay, so optional advice for you, the reader, if you've decided to pick this book up and spend some time with it. Maybe you'll get something out of it that's valuable. Maybe you won't, but you don't have to follow along with it. I'm certainly not going to tell you that you should model yourself on my behavior. Okay. What else, Virginia?
Maybe he's trying to say just because his method works for him doesn't mean.
Okay. So it works for me. Might work for you. You can decide for yourself. That's the other implied. Decide for yourself. That may be the other implied message here. A question. If this is the way he feels about his findings, why not call this discourse on a method for conducting one's reason well? We may be a stickler for grammar, maybe that doesn't make a big difference. Does this fit? Okay. Does this fit the character of the work he's giving? We'll look at this more deeply, I guess, when we get to part 2 of the discourse. But I've suggested it's false modesty and false humility. Any ideas what the reasons for that might be? Entertain as a hypothesis, perhaps, that he's pulling his reader's legs a little bit here. He's pretending to be more modest than in fact he is. If that's the case, why would he do that? Okay, so this could be a kind of way of increasing his appeal to the public. We could think of this, I mentioned Socrates in one of the videos, this guy who begins teaching us by reassuring us that he has literally nothing to teach us. This is only about what works for him. So maybe there's a certain kind of appeal, right? He disavows having any intellectual authority to actually speak in a way that people should follow. So what do we have then instead? What's the appeal of this work? Well, there may be a kind of ironic appeal. We see this in Socrates as well. The fact that he goes on and on about having nothing to teach gives us an idea that perhaps he is really does. He has something to teach. You guys read Euthyphro, perhaps some of you? I know in my sections we did in 103. In Euthyphro, Socrates begins by saying, Euthyphro, I know nothing about piety, right? The big innocent eyes. And by the end of the dialogue, both Euthyphro and the reader, Socrates in fact knows a great deal about piety and did at the beginning of the conversation. And he's lured Euthyphro into a trap of sorts. Is something similar going on here? Descartes may, in fact, have an agenda and a source of authority that he's concealing for the sake of selling it. It may even be, perhaps, that his readers, being 17th century French intellectuals in the sense that they're literate and have leisure time to buy and read this book, are aware of this irony. It's the fact that he's pretending to have nothing to teach, we're pretending to believe him. But we all know that it's a bit of a sham, it's a show. This is something very big and pre-revolutionary. Let me jump ahead to paragraph 5. Let's take a look at page 2 again. Look. Paragraph 2, he says, I've never presumed my mind was in any respect more perfect than ordinary men. Third paragraph, I shall have no fear of saying that I think I've been rather fortunate to have been led on certain paths by which I have formed a method which seems to me I have the means to increase my knowledge by degrees and to raise it little by little to the highest point which the mediocrity of my mind will allow it to attain, etc. So we have, he's laying it on very thick here. Paragraph 4, could be that I'm mistaken, right? I shall be very happy to show the paths I have followed so that everyone may judge it for himself. And then the very bottom of page 2, paragraph 5. Thus my purpose here is not to teach the method that everyone ought to follow in order to conduct his reason well, which the title may belie, but merely to show how I have tried to conduct my own. Those who take it upon themselves to give precepts must regard themselves as more competent than those to whom they give them, etc. Putting forward this essay really as a story, or as you prefer, a fable, in which one will perhaps find some examples that one will have reason not to follow or follow. I hope I can be useful to some without being harmful to anyone, and everyone will be grateful to me for my frankness. What's Descartes' goal here? Is it to get taken seriously in a sort of ironic literary culture? It's something also I'll note here. Right? Disavows intellectual authority, and by not making use of it himself, he calls that same authority into question. That is, he seems to be suggesting that anyone who does what I'm pretending not to do right now is someone of whom you should be at least a little bit suspicious. So I'm going to, reader, just sort of set open the workings of my mind. You can decide whether it's good for you or not. And unlike those professors in Paris, unlike the other people who might not speak to you in this sort of the democratic way as equals, I'm not going to tell you what you should think or how you're wrong for not agreeing with me. So this is a sort of rhetorical appeal meant to sort of draw the reader in, I think, to help the reader to identify with Descartes, an ordinary guy just like me, and he's presenting the method in such a way that we can go through the same sort of thought experiments that he's going through, and he thinks arrive at his same conclusion. Now, claiming you don't have intellectual authority is not the same thing as not having intellectual authority. So I think we need to read this with an awareness of the levels of irony that are at work here, that are, I think, entirely expected and accounted for by his audience in the 1630s, that Descartes is playing a bit of the Socratic game with us by pretending to have nothing to teach, and then teaching us a great deal and giving us some paradoxical and super ironic, but also an educating irony. His goal is to convince us of something. If we're not aware of that and the way he's trying to do it, we're likely to find ourselves sort of going along with it without evaluating it sufficiently. So we don't want to sort of read this as naive readers. We want to be aware of the fact that Descartes is putting on a bit of a show for our benefit. So we want to identify, I think, the intellectual content of what he's saying and the authority. If he doesn't say, look, because I'm a professor, he's not. But it's that I'm a professor, my professorship, I'm an authority, you should listen to me. Because I'm super intelligent, you should listen to me. What's the source of his authority then, if he has any? It's a major theme of the discourse. Why should anybody read this book then? Apart from the fact that they want to, right? It might work for you, maybe you're curious, maybe you've heard that this guy Descartes written a sort of interesting book. This work's published in French in the vernacular, so it's accessible to non-scholars in the 1630s, 1640s. Yes, Rebecca?
Does he study?
Okay. He immediately then starts talking about his education, right? You can ask. The source of his authority, he does talk about his education, but mostly to criticize it and to say it was mostly worthless, the mathematics part was okay. I really think I needed to go out into the world of experience. So he's going to talk a little bit about his education. He's going to talk about the world of common experience from which he's drawing most of his insights. We'll see this especially in part 2, which we'll read for next time. You see this democratic spirit again, where he says, I think just the ordinary reasonings of common people without a lot of education, without a lot of philosophical training, are generally more accurate and more worthwhile and more valuable than the highly refined reasonings of professors at universities. And I think the other source of intellectual authority for this work is going to be the actual content of the discourse, presented in a way that you can check it for yourself. So we're going back to this idea that each reader should keep reading and decide for himself whether this is going to work or not. He's not necessarily going to need to be concerned with whether this work is going to fit in with his overall system of thought or with his prior understanding. He should read it, Descartes suggesting, with an open mind, drawing upon what he has in common with Descartes and with everyone else, and to judge for himself whether the discourse has any sort of authority. So one of the major themes of the discourse that I want to introduce today and talk about today and next time is this sense of intellectual autonomy that Descartes emphasizes. The fact that everybody should judge his work for him or herself on whatever grounds seem best, drawing upon common sense and common experience without relying upon the authority of any kind of established institution, body of thought, school of philosophy.